We will talk about the history of Windows at this point. Windows dates back to 1985, so it's a product that has been around for many years, 25 plus years at this point. Windows 1 was originally released in 1985. The original versions of Windows were purely a desktop environment that ran on top of DOS. So you had to start MS-DOS first, or PC-DOS, and then you would start running Windows, which was just a desktop environment, which just gave you a way to work with the stuff without having to go to the DOS prompt. Windows 1 was put out there. There was a lot of pre-play about it, about this wonderful new thing. There were some other desktop environments that were at that time period, but Windows 1 didn't really do anything big in the world out there. Windows 2 came along soon thereafter. It was also similar, used by a few people, but pretty much just another product on the market out there that nobody really paid a whole lot of attention to. Windows 3 appeared in the early 90s, and that was the first version that was actually used by a large number of people and came into a popular use, and that thing started being written for Windows 3. The desktop got improved on it. It became a much more usable one and became much more of one that you could use the icons to do stuff with. Windows 3.1 came out following 3 as a revision to 3, but it was a good bit of revision of how things were set up and how things were scattered around. And Windows 3.1 is where Windows really broke loose into the world and became the system out there to be using, but it was still just a desktop environment running on top of Windows. When Windows 95 appeared in 1995, actually it appeared just before then, and it had beta copies of it that were publicly released, and you could get a beta copy, order a beta copy and have it, and lots of people did, and they were playing with Windows 95 and seeing what was this wonderful new system that had been developed by Microsoft. This one was actually an integrated system and had the operating system built into it and was integrated into it. And so no longer did you have to have DOS and then run Windows on top of it. You just started up Windows in the program that you got, and that included DOS with it, although you could go back to the DOS prompt and it was still actually running on top of DOS. So it was still an environment on top of there. That one was the one that really broke loose. One of the other items that was really a big one for it at that point was Internet Explorer was released as part of Windows 95 at that point, and Windows 95 was the first that was designed to work with the Internet. Windows 3.10 was the first version of Windows that had a networking component built into it, but it wasn't real well integrated, but it had some additional pieces. With Windows 95 it was. Windows 95 you'll see, and the subsequent products after that, you'll see quite often referenced as Windows 9X. That includes Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows 98 version 2, release 2, and Windows ME, although we'll mention Windows ME a little bit in just further detail in just a minute. But that's the Windows 9X line. Windows NT line was another line that was developed completely separate from Windows. It used the Windows desktop, although chronically it was using the previous version of the Windows 9X or Windows 3 line on the copy that it came out with. Now, Windows NT was initially developed with IBM. It really was a server-designed one, although it was also a client-designed one, although Microsoft didn't play the client quite as much, but it was a client and a server. So there was a client version, but it was a professional version. It wasn't for the regular consumer. It was oriented for the professional out there, the professional IT worker, and such. It was developed with IBM, and there in the mid-90s, the two of them split up on it before they came out with it. Instead of coming out with the one product they had developed, IBM created it on out, brought the product on out of the part they kept, and they're little finishing up on it as OS2. And that was originally what the name was going to be. And Unfortunately, IBM just did not know how to market their product because they really had a better product on it, and they just didn't market it, and it was a really neat one. It was multi-server, designed for servers and for heavy-end PCs, designed for the users, multi-programming on it, so lots of stuff ran at one time, and it had a lot of neat features to it, and was a really well-designed one. Microsoft took their part and came out with Windows NT. What the NT stood for, they never have said. It's been debated whether it was new technology, next technology, and that's been the guesses most of the time on it. There's been some other names used by people about what NT stood for because they were disappointed with how it worked. The original version of Windows NT was not 1, but was 3.5, because they were catching their numbering system to go along with the Windows 9X 3 line, and at that point 95 had not come out yet. It came out just before 95, but it was after 3, so they called it Windows NT 3.5. There were two versions of it. There was a server version of it, and there was a pro version of it. They then released the next one that came out was Windows NT 4, and that product came out and worked along its way on it. Windows NT 5, which was due to come in 1998 originally, then 99, and then 2000, and it finally made it in 2000, was designed to be a whole new thing that was going to combine what Windows NT did and the Windows 9X did, and be compatible with both. And they were going to make a lot of other leap forward items on Windows 5 at that point. Well, because they fell so far behind, Windows 5 name disappeared, and when they brought it out, they called it Windows 2000. And it came out shortly there before 2000, and they said that it wasn't late because it was Windows 2000, that it was a different product. However, if you go in and do version on it, you discover it was Windows 5. And unfortunately, though, in all of that time of all the stuff they were trying to do, they never could figure out how to get the two quite merged together, and they had to finally give up on that for that version. So Windows 2000 did not merge the two lines, but was just the upgrade for the latest Windows NT. Because of that, they came out with Windows ME for the 9X line because they needed an upgrade at that point, and it had been the 3 years that they tried to get a major new upgrade out in operating systems. So they came out with Windows ME, which had a lot of problems with it, but it was a hurry-up, thrown out there upgrade that was purely to get upgrade income, and it was thrown out there real fast. The next upgrade that occurred, major upgrade, was Windows XP. That actually did bring about the merger of the Windows NT line and the Windows 9X line. Windows 9X products generally ran on Windows XP. Windows NT products ran on Windows XP also. Two major versions of it. The client version, called Windows XP Professional, and the server version called Windows XP Server. So that one, actually with XP there was no server, but Windows Server came out at the same time. Server 2003, which was the server product, which came out shortly after XP. So there was no server product on XP, sorry about that. But the client version was called XP, the server version was Server 2003. But they were the merger, they both worked the same, and they worked together, and that was intended to be the two lines, and they sort of went with two different names on it at that point, as opposed to Windows 2000 that had a professional version and a server version. Windows XP you still find in a lot of use out there in the world. A lot of people have not upgraded from it, and I would expect it's going to continue to be used through probably 2014, 2015. You'll probably continue to see a lot of products out there. In 2011, you can actually still find people using Windows 95, 98, Windows 98 Second Edition, which was the actual name of the major revision for it, was Windows 98 Second Edition, and you will find Windows 2000 still out there. There may be somebody out there still using Windows NT 4 3.5, but I really doubt they're out there. But you will find 2000, and you'll find the others out there, and XP still extensively used. Following that, Windows Vista was next released, and they did a lot of revision with the interface on it and with the background on it, and came out with a product that actually the interface fits closer to back to what they said Windows 95 was going to be. Windows 95 was supposed to be a product that was going to be language independent. You didn't have to be able to know the language it was written in, because stuff was going to be all icons on the screen, and you could do it graphically. So it was going to be a wonderful graphical user interface. Yes, they had graphics for stuff, but unfortunately trying to tell icons apart tended to get a little hard. So Vista did an improved version on that, but they also put a lot more security in it and locked down security probably a little too tight, and made a lot of people uncomfortable with that. Vista has got a fair amount of usage out there today, but Vista never caught on really well. Windows Server 2008 was the server version that was released with Vista shortly after Vista, and you'll find that one still heavily used out there. Windows 7 was released to the public in October of 2009, and that you could actually get the release to manufacturing version of it, which is what was sent to the manufacturing facilities to make the CDs for it, or the RTM version, from August 2009. I began using Windows 7 in August of 2009. Windows 7 was designed to work on multi-core machines. It still works on single-core machines, 64-bit machines really well, 32-bit machines still, and they improved the interface more and made it even better, and they've made it even more now where you don't have to know the language really to be able to figure stuff off the screen. Still helps some to know if it's in English, for you to know English, or if it's in Portuguese. Knowing Portuguese would make it a little easier, but you should be able to basically run your machine in the wrong language. And I've worked on machines in Portuguese, Chinese, and English, and the Chinese ones I had no idea, and actually the Windows Vista machines I could do pretty well on. Back on the Windows 9X ones and XP, it got a little harder on the Chinese. The Portuguese worked okay back with the 9X ones, because I know a little bit of Spanish and was able to do that. I don't really know a whole lot of Spanish, but I took it a few years, and I recognize words sometimes, and I could tell what it was then. So Windows 7 came out, and Windows 7's really been a good product. It's still got the tightened security, but they loosened on how it affects the user and didn't block everybody on everything, made it where it was a more friendly system. Server 2008 Release 2 is the version of server that was released after Windows 7 that goes with Windows 7 as the server version. Now, Vista, instead of calling it Windows Vista Professional, they changed it to Business. The client version of XP, which was the only version of XP, they called it Windows XP Professional, which fell in line with the previous Windows NT products on the client version. But Windows Vista, they changed it to Business instead of Professional. Just changed the name, but that was that way. Windows 7, they have gone back to Professional for the client version. And then Server 2008 is the server version. Now, in all of those server versions, there's several different versions of server there for you. Whether you're looking at a standard version for just a standalone server, a server version for a server that is serving a major enterprise, that would be an enterprise version, or a couple of versions in between, and even a web server version in these ones as we've moved more and more towards that. Looking on forward from this, later in 2011 or early 2012, Windows 8 should be released, and that's the expectation in early 2011 that the name will be. Microsoft has not officially said, but it's expected to be Windows 8. Now, Windows 7, if you do the version command on it, you'll discover it's actually version 8. And when we get to Windows 8, its version number will actually be 9. And if you look at the numbers after the decimal point when you do the version number, that's actually the old numbers. Every time they make changes to it, and that they go in and correct some errors in it or whatever, and they recompile it again, they give it a new build number, and so that number keeps increasing. Usually you're going to see when the product is released with the Windows software that it's going to be a number well over 1,000 will be the actual release number, and that tells you that they've already gone through 1,000. If it was 1,000, that tells you they've already gone through 1,000 versions of it before, which could be small little things that they forgot to put a period in at one spot, or it could be something major that they discovered it blew up if you did this combination, that you got the blue screen of death and they figured the cure for it. And then what the server version that will go with Windows 8, they haven't said on that, although the web server version is actually called 2012, and that there are some other things on that starting to appear. But that is a brief history of Windows to this point. If you look back on DOS, which we talked about, the stuff running on top of originally, that takes you back in the Microsoft environment to 1981, when you had DOS version 1, and DOS ran on up through version 6 from Microsoft, which is what the Windows 3 and 3.1 were really running on, is that they were running on versions of MS-DOS 6, and IBM actually took DOS one step further. They called their DOS PC-DOS. Microsoft called theirs MS-DOS. But PC-DOS was IBM's product, and they went through version 7. But that will give you a brief background on the history of Windows and where we are today with it.